Okay, all right. So the place was supposed to be a temporary structure, and there was supposed to be a huge museum built at the back, and that project never eventually happened. So this remains the National Museum. It's very small. It's just this space, all right. And so you move from here to there. So here you have the archaeology of the beginning, the prehistory, the archaeology of Ghana, and then you move to the culture. Today's ethnographic and culture of Ghana, right? There is nothing up there for now. And then at the back there is a space for temporary exhibitions. So there is currently a temporary exhibition by a Polish artist, actually, who works around the themes of forests and the environment. Quite nice. We'll have a look.
The most important thing.
And Anansi, yeah.
Anansi.
Yeah, Anansi, yes. So Anansi is like kind of a trickster in Ashanti's storytelling. He's a trickster. It's like a little bit like the fox in European kind of yeah. So it tells a story. So that's why he's there. He's in the form of a spider, right? And then it tells stories. So that's why you have the Anansi there in the middle of the museum to tell the story that we are going to look at now.
But there's also a myth that because the symbolism behind it is that life is a narrative, it's a story, we make stories, and then life unfolds. And in one really old story, it is said that once there was this kind of talk about who has the stories, who doesn't have the stories, and Anansi had to do 3 assignments that were completely impossible. And he did all of them. So then Anansi became the keeper of all the stories of the world. And the symbolism for Ghana that I think is really beautiful is that it is about unity and diversity. It's a really diverse group of ethnic backgrounds in living through Ghana, and they all live together, being all one as Ghanaians. And the tour guide here, when I came here the first time, he told me that also the web also symbolizes that if something that doesn't belong there and it intrudes, the spider senses it in the web, and he can go there to remove it. And that's also the trickster part of it. So he's een beetje sluw, zou je zeggen. He's very smart and clever, but sometimes he gets a little bit too heroic or
too clever,
and then he falls on his mouth.
Yeah. So of course, these stories are predates Ghana. I mean, so we could say that they are constantly being kind of revised and given new meanings. As Ghana evolves. Probably in the 19th century, Ashanti, it had some kind of an imperial meaning also, as Ashanti was kind of building an empire that is about the size of Ghana today. And then now we are more into the nation building kind of narrative. So it's also interesting how these stories and these characters kind of evolve with the story of the place. So yeah. So Ghana is not new, as you can see. You go back to really the Paleolithic with all this material. So you have everything represented here from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic with the axes there, right? From the hand axe, typical of the Acheulean, and then the what we call Nyamiakuma. So these are interesting. They are axes that were used as axes, 3,000 years ago, and they are polished kind of stones, very different from that, right? This is much older, right? We are going about tens of thousands of years back here. Here is a little bit more recent. It corresponds a little bit with the same kind of scenario in Europe, where we go from the stone that is kind of cut to a stone that is smooth. But these still exist, so you can still buy this on the market today. because they were, long after they were not used as an axe any longer, they were used as an object, all right, that was had some kind of ritual meaning. Like I excavated a cemetery, a 17th century cemetery, not very far from the Commander, and every burial was associated with several of these objects. And the symbolism is that people call them Nyame Akuma because Nyame is God, right? So it's the axe of God, right? Why? Because they realize that anytime there is a very heavy rain and there is a kind of thunder striking, they find this type of things because of course there is the rain erodes the surface, all right, and uncovers ancient material, and so they made this correspondence, and so this is kind of a connection between the sky and the earth, right? So by associating it with the burial, in some ways, right, they were creating this association between the burial and then the sky god, all right? So in Ghana's, I mean, ancient religions, there is all, whatever we go, whether Ashanti or Ewe, there is always a sky god, right? Which is very, very, very far, right? Is not a god we talk to directly, right? So that's why we have a lot of many different deities that are kind of the go-between the highest god and there is also the god of earth, all right, who is a woman. The highest god is rather a man, right? That's how it is symbolically. So there's always this connection, and this connection is made possible through a number of deities that are in the landscape, right? And also ancestors, so humans that have kind of been deified as ancestors and have this capacity of creators, all right, their descendants, and then the higher gods, right? So that's basically how it works. So when Christianity came in the country, they basically used the word for the high god for the Christian God, right? So today you go to church, you hear Nyame, you hear Maru for the Ewe, so you kind of correspondence. So these pastors did some research. Actually, the first Protestant pastors that came here, they were also linguists. So the first thing they did was to translate the Bible, right? And so they researched the language and they picked, specific names to correspond to specific Christian stuff. And so, but actually, there is continuity in some ways. So here we have a map. If you look at the map, you feel like, all right, all the medieval history of the area stops at the Sahel, right? This place is empty. It was not the case, right? Of course, it was not the case. The only thing is that for these parts, we have some kind of text, right? Arabic manuscripts and material that were written by people using the Arabic language to write in their own language, scripts to write in their own language. So we have sources, written sources here. There is no written sources here for the ancient period, let's say before the 15th century. But there is archaeology, right? So archaeology tells us that this place was not empty at all. Not only it was not empty, but it was absolutely connected to the Sahel, right? And so through the Sahel to the old world and to this network that were, established, at least really became huge in the 12th century, connecting Asia, Europe, Africa. So this shows, the big story of the Sahelian, great empire, right? Which has nothing to do with Ghana. But in some ways, it also tells a story that is interesting of why is this place called Ghana, right? Because if you look at this map, right, you see that Ghana, or what the Arabic historians or writers, travelers were writing in the 9th century, 10th century, what they call Ghana, was actually a polity that would be today between Mauritania, Mali, and Senegal, right? This corner here. And so we are here, right? So how did we pass from here to here?
Berlin conference?
Sorry?
Berlin conference?
No. It's very much a post-colonial thing. So when Ghana looked for a name for itself, all right, they say Gold Coast. No, we don't want to be the Gold Coast because, of course, it doesn't really fit, the north, and it doesn't give us. And then we don't want this name that was given to us by Europeans. We want our own name, and we want, if possible, a name of an ancient polity that was independent, that was strong, that is known, right? And that's going to be us, right? So we are going to connect the dots between the modern Ghana, the modern new state, and then this ancient polity. And we are going to be an autonomous, independent country that does not depend on, what the outside world say about us. So that's how Ghana was adopted as a name. If you look at it very well, you realize there's actually not the only one. Of course, Mali, modern Mali, is inspired from the Empire of Mali. Benin, right, which used to be Dahomey, not this Benin. This Benin is a town, right, but there is a polity here, the Benin, right, Cotonou as the capital, and they took the name from their neighbors, right. There was a kingdom of Benin, very powerful in the 15th, 16th century here. They took that name instead of Dahomey because Dahomey was also a very important kingdom, but it was a kingdom that was very much involved in the slave trade. And it did not really, it really covered the southern part of what is today Benin. And the northern part was very much like a slave reserve, right? So it's not everyone in the north that wanted to include it in a modern polity that would be called Dahomey, with all these connections to the ancient slave trade and so on. So they took the name from their neighbor, Benin, right? And now it's the Republic of Benin. So there are many stories like that. Same with Zimbabwe on the other side of Africa, all right? Zimbabwe derived its name from Great Zimbabwe, so this pre-European polity in East Africa. All right, so you have a little illustration of archaeology in Ghana. We have a department of archaeology and heritage studies at the University of Ghana. There's only one department for this discipline in Ghana, so this is an illustration of doing archaeology. Since before the independence in Ghana, of really interesting aspects of the pre-colonial history of this place, including these works, right? So all these things come from northern Ghana, right? And they are, I don't know if you are, they are not very well known, but they are on the red list actually of objects. There is a traffic of these objects. And they come from a place that is called Koma today, around, Koma is actually a language today in Ghana. So it's an area in northern Ghana that is a little bit far away, right? But it's characterized by many mounds, right? That are covering hundreds of square kilometers of ancient settlements. The period is probably mid first millennium to mid second millennium, something like that, right? And these mounds are two different things. There is some house mounds and there is some ritual mounds. And basically, these objects come from the ritual mounds. And we think that they were used in rituals connecting the ancestors to that world I was talking about, that invisible world, especially in connection with probably with health and healthcare and treatment, medicine, right? The definition of medicine in Africa is oftentimes a little bit different from our perspective in Europe. In Africa, medicine is something that brings together, the physical treatment and also the spiritual treatment, right? Everything is connected in some ways. And so those who were practicing medicine were also people who were involved in interrogating the ancestors, practicing rituals and so on, with the idea that every disease, every problem has roots, in the invisible world, right? So all these objects are figurines that comes from the same coma sites.
So I saw that they're hollow.
Yes, yes. So there's been some studies and there's been some analysis of the substance that were inside. So there were substance inside, all right, that have been analyzed. Sometimes there is even some imported resins that is not from Ghana, that were imported from through the trans-Saharan trade, that were used in the rituals and so on. So the idea is actually to pour libation, with a liquid or a potion on these objects. And as you rightly, there are holes in these things. So some of them might have represented a living individual that was sick. Some of them might have represented some, divine creatures or ancestral figures. Oftentimes, you see that the figure of the twin is, like in Europe also, it's kind of prominent, right? This double face kind of objects, you see a lot of them, you can go around. And in many parts of West Africa, you actually have also cults around twins. South Africa is very negative. In some parts of Africa, it's very positive. But there is always something, strange and kind of irrational about us. We see animals. We see something about the universe of these people that we would not really know about if we did not have these objects, right? Yeah, fish. And this is also something you find in the terracottas of Mali and so on. Is a very powerful kind of paintings and representations. Is that these sites are actually on the list of possible UNESCO sites, right? And what is interesting is this granary. So basically, villages were using these places to hide their harvests, to avoid, armed groups to come and collect everything. So they would keep some in the village, right? If they were under pressure of delivering grains to a group of armed guys, they would deliver what they have, but they would know that actually part of the harvest is hidden in the hills, right? In these sites where, so that was a kind of, so it's an interesting also,
taking things from each other.
Yeah, it's an interesting remembering of a time that was a little bit dangerous, right, in the era. So you have some engravings, you have paintings, and you have granaries, right? This is, and of course, this type of mosques, which we call Sudanic type of mosques, right?
How much percentage of Ghanaians is
Kumasi 20 years ago and the time now, I'm seeing much more evidence of Islam, becoming a major faith, even in Kumasi. So, a group of people, right? And today they have become very difficult to use because they are too small, right? So most of these Muslim communities that live in these communities, they have gotten support from the Gulf states to build huge mosques, right? And these are kind of abandoned, right? So that's the problem. So GMMB do not own these. I mean, they are privately owned by communities, but especially many links with this community helps getting funding to kind of keep this building standing, right? Yeah. Known is the glass beads, right, and stone beads. Well, these were probably not stone beads. Actually, they were probably parts of were used, like this, like a weight on a tool.
Yeah.
We call it in French bâton fouisseur. I don't know how it is in English, but basically a tool to look for roots and ant hills and stuff like that, right? But the rest of them are either stone beads like this one. So this is made of bauxite. Ghana is rich in bauxite. That's why there is an aluminium factory that was built by Nkrumah. That's why the Volta Dam was created.
Yeah.
In Ghana. This is also comes from this area between the forest and the savannah. Kind of a culture 3,000, 4,000 years ago with this material, we call them rasps. We don't exactly know what they were made of, where they were made for, right? There are these things, right? They look a little bit like rasps, so
Yeah.
they have been called rasps, but we are not too sure about what they were made for because they are not very, very strong, right? So they are not actually, for rasping, but they're grounding. And you see, they are associated with the same Nyame Akuma that I was talking about. Okay, quite typical from. Of course, they have pottery already. They were great hunters and fishermen, and they, also used tool. There was no iron at that period of time, of course, and no metal. Right, so it's really a form of Neolithic. But as you can see, people were mixing these small artifacts, right, microlith, which is made of quartz, right, which is just broken to make sharp edge, with grounding, stones that are polished. So there is no, total differentiation. People keep using, different type of material,
Yeah.
for a very long time, and even until quite recently, because there is nothing that cuts better than the quartz. They actually still use them in surgery in some places. Yeah.
Whoa. Bark cloth.
Yeah, so this is the bark cloth. So that's a product from the forest that kind of almost disappeared, right? It's a bit similar in Polynesia. Yeah. So this is about plants, right? And medicinal plants and so on. Of course, really, really important in the tropical world. Here we have a little exhibit about traditional iron making, right? So let's say by the beginning of the first millennium, iron kind of starts diffusing broadly in the area and become really available everywhere. And so people use furnaces, all right? So they build furnaces made of clay, right? And charcoal, and then the ore, metal ore. Of course, Africa is very rich in iron ore. That's why our soils are red, and so they bring the ore, the charcoal within the furnace. They put fire. They inject oxygen through these tuyers, right? They are like pipes made of clay, right? And the bellows on the end, right? And inject, oxygen to kind of accelerate the combustion. Then eventually at the end, you get the loop, right? The iron loop, which is basically separating the iron from the other type of minerals in the ore. Yeah. And then this is brought lent to the blacksmith, remove more impurity, and then eventually transform it into a metal object, right? So iron making, throughout Africa also, right? Prometheus kind of metaphor. Women were banned from looking at that because of that kind of symbolism with birth and all right, kind of men giving birth, all right, to something, all right, compared to women giving birth, all right.
Yeah.
So there was very interesting kind of ritual ideas and stories around it.
Oh, fascinating.
So we have objects made of iron, of course. The hoe being the most important tool for the agriculture, right? That's a tool that is very, very appropriate for African soil. Today, many studies shows that the soils are oftentimes a bit shallow, right? We are in tropical area. Carbon is kind of doesn't really create, disintegrate and create these humus kind of layers like in Europe. And so the soils, the rich soils are really usually quite shallow. And something you don't want is to go too deep to bring the soil that is actually not fertile and bringing up like we do with tractors, all right? Tractors is good for very thick, rich soil, all right? But when you have a shallow soil, this is actually a better tool to actually move the soil without bringing the unfertile soil up, right? Yeah, so they are really interesting tools. Yeah, sometimes of course, we find pots and so on, but we miss something, which is all the basketry that might have existed around the pots, right? To carry the pots and so on. And so it's interesting to look at the ethnographic kind of narrative to better understand how these pots were used, transported, and so on. So all these are ways to transport. This you put it on your head, and you can put four. Yeah, you can put four pots there, right, and carry them like that. This also, right, you carry it on your head, and you can put different pots there.
Yeah.
Right? So this also you carry on your head, right? So it's an
Brilliant.
don't forget that for most of the history of Africa, there was no traction animals used, right? Everything was made with people. People carry stuff. Carriers, were really important. Horses were oftentimes very sick in tropical areas, so they were really animals that were used for prestige, for military purposes, for the big guys, right? But not in huge numbers and not before the 15th century. Donkeys, they existed in the Sahel, in northern Ghana, you can see them, but they are not really present in. So all these animals were susceptible to trypanosomias, which is the sleeping disease, right? Sleeping illness. Is a disease that is transmitted by a tsetse fly, and so they would die quite quickly, right? And so most of the transportation in the forest zone was done by foot and on head and by porters, right?
Why is it on the head and not on the
Well, oftentimes people also carry stuff, so it's kind of multiply the possibilities. But I think in Europe also we used to carry things on the head. I know in France we have a song about somebody who goes to the fountain to fill their pots with water, and then she carried it on the head, and on the way back home she fell and the thing broke. So we forgot it. You can come here also. So this is what we call Manila. So they are made of brass, physically, right? So
We gaan de goede kant op.
in the forest zone of West Africa, there is no
Weer
copper.
vragen bij de receptie.
Right? Were really metals that had huge value in the forest compared with gold, which was available and which was exchanged against this type of metal. So this metal was used to make currency, and these are currencies actually, right? These currencies they became they remained valid till the 1950s, right? I don't know in Ghana, but in Nigeria, I think there is the British colonial authority forbid the use of this money, which was really spread in colonial Nigeria, I think in 1952, right? Just to give you an idea. And so these were currencies because of the value of copper, right, and brass, which were coming from outside, and therefore were having this special value. So when the Europeans arrived on the coast of the Gold Coast in the 15th century, they also come to realization that there is a huge demand for this metal, right? So if you look at 15th, 17th century up to the 17th century cargoes that are coming to the Gold Coast, they are full of copper and brass objects, right? Mostly pots, that were actually transformed locally into all kinds of other objects, right? But they were easy to carry because they could be piled up, right? They could be carried on the head. So pots were, huge marmites or whatever you want to call them, were oftentimes the way this metal came on the coast.
some weight there must be?
Yeah. And of course there is cowrie, right? So today you are spending Ghana cedis. Cedis is the word for cowries, All right, so these shells, same thing. These shells they are not available in the Gulf of Guinea, right? They come from the Indian Ocean, right? So they add value because they are not locally produced, right? So we know they started circulating at least since the first millennium in Africa. But then when the Europeans came also, right, they realized that this money, this local money, they know where to find it. It's in around the Maldives, right, around the Indian, the Maldives Islands. That's where these animals really live. And so I said, what about if we bring cargoes of this stuff here and sell them here, right? So of course, right. Same with the metal, right? Because
Then went down, yeah.
yeah, because in my excavation in Ife, right, we know about the Ife bronze heads and these things, right? But they are super rare, right? There is maybe 17 that we know about, and they are all found in one cache, right? I don't find copper, right? Because it was really a kind of a super elite kind of product, right? Now, when the Europeans arrived with the cargoes full of it, they created a depreciation of the metal.
Of course, yeah.
Right now, everyone had access to the metal. That created problems because the metal was not just having value; it had also ritual value, and it's an inflation also of the ritual value of the metal, which translated into gifts by the Portuguese to become huge. So, for instance, they were bringing what we call the Neptunes, which are the largest possible marmot, right? And these ones were given as gifts, right? So size increased because the value of the metal actually decreases, right? Yeah. Of Ghana is quite evolved, right? But in Ghana, you have a large. It was a fairly fragmented political landscape, right? And not only in terms of quality, but also in terms of languages. People spoke different language in Accra or east of the Volta River or west of the Pra River.
Yeah.
So there is all kind of languages, and although most of these people shared a lot in terms of cultural values, and they changed a lot, and they intermarried, and so on. There is still some specific, cultural characters for each of them. Here you have festivals, right? So, and this is something that is very strong still today in Ghana. Each settlement, each ancient polity has this set of festivals, which is about several things. There is many different festivals, but oftentimes, like the Ojwira, for instance, is a yam festival, right? So it's like a New Year festival, if you want, when the new yam is ready for being harvested, right? But you also have festivals that celebrate the ancestors, for instance, right? So you have a very broad array of festivals in Ghana, and till today they remain, a major source of attraction, not only for members of the community that are scattered around and who come back for the festival, right? And also for attracting the international public, I'll say. The use of clothes, unsewn kind of clothes, although they are sewn in a way because there are bands that are actually sewn together, but they are not sewn; they just form one rectangle, right? And so in the northern part of Ghana, people were rather wearing sewn garments. In the southern of Ghana, people were rather wearing this type of toga kind of clothes, right?
Yeah, like this.
Yeah.
They have a lot of.
This is in Accra, right? Of course, the colors also have their symbolism, right?
Yeah.
If you go to a funeral, like you are going to go to the funeral, you see people are going to be dressed in black and red, right? Which are the colors of the funeral. Unless the person was very, very old. And therefore, people say, okay, this person really lived well, and we need not to be sad, but to celebrate, right? Then people are going to wear white, right? But for most funeral, you see people wearing these colors, right? Black and white. And in some parts, right, people use this color also for some festivals, right? So this is actually what we call batakari. You see it in Ghana. There is a lot of modern version of it.
Yeah.
You have some too large down there because you can sit on the horse, right? And they are very thick. The real one, they are really thick. You can sweat in that thing very well. Because they protected, they were part of the protective gear of the cavalries, all right?
It's like a brigade.
Yes. So in the 19th century, in northern Ghana, people were using this type of chainmail, but they were not that frequent. Most people that were on horseback fighting would wear some very thick layers of cottons that would be, put around the torso, right? And then they will wear these, and then the additional protection would be the ritual protection provided by the talismans, right? So once again, physical and ritual kind of come together, right, in that story.
Like
Yes,
I said,
yes, it's exactly all right. Of course, the musket comes quite early in coastal Ghana. It is restricted, so until the British basically comes and through competition with the Dutch and the Portuguese, they start importing massive amount of musket. During the Portugal time, before 1630s, the Portuguese try as much as possible to kind of not import too many firearms, but then there are a lot of nations that actually kind of do not recognize Portuguese monopoly and import these guns. So as early as the 17th century, the muskets are everywhere. Like there is. I've edited the travel account by a French guy who comes to Elmina in 1671, right? He's invited by the Dutch governor of Elmina to have dinner, and then after dinner, both of them go to the parapet of the fort. They look at the village, and they see like 400 guys that are doing some military exercise, and the French guy tells the Dutch guy, so you organize that? This is your. The Dutch guy said, no, it's not me. They are crazy. They're always doing the exercise, right? And all of them are wearing muskets, right? So that's what I say is that also the relationship between the forts and then the settlements associated with the fort is always much more complex than just the colonial relationship, right? That's why sometimes even the Dutch or later the British would have to bombard their own village, right? Because it's not clear that they actually have power over the authority of the villages, right? Very large lineage associations of a symbol, right, that represent them, and these are canes of what we call in English linguists. Increase Otiame, and they are basically those who speak on behalf of the chief, right? So this is actually something that Europeans introduced because during the 17th, 18th century, when the governor of Elmina, for instance, wanted to send a message to a king inside, he would send a messenger with a cane, oftentimes with a silver, top, as a representation of his authority, right? And this kind of, entered into the Akan culture. And so now the representative of the chief, the one who speaks on behalf of the chief, oftentimes carries his cane, right, as he's speaking. And on the top of the cane, the animal you see that is tells you which lineage, which clan, all right, this Otiame belongs to, and therefore this chief belongs to. Right? It's a bit complicated, but let me try to make it simple. From the second half of the 17th century, the slave trade really kind of explodes on the Gold Coast, right? And by 1700, there is more value in the export of people than in the export of gold, right? So there is a shift in trade, which means that the 18th century is really the century of the slave trade. Basically, a collapse of the trade in gold, because the slave trade brings insecurity, and gold mining does not like insecurity, right? For gold to come from the places where it is extracted, you need a freeway, you need circulation, you need all these things. When the landscape is covered with groups of gangsters that are kidnapping people, it's much more complicated, all right? So you have actually a collapse of the gold export, and the gold becomes more and more internalized in the society, all right, and used as a currency inside. To such an extent that in the 18th century, the Gold Coast starts importing gold from Brazil.
Whoa.
Yeah. So the Europeans actually bring gold from Brazil to feed in that gold. And actually, when you see Ghana today, you understand that, you know, like Sika is almost like a sacred word, all right? Gold is still very much impressed in the imagination of people in this country, right? Gold is very, very powerful. The problem with that is that that creates a lot of insecurity, right? And so people here belongs to matrilineal society, right, on the coast. Most of them, at least from Accra to the western part, meaning that you don't belong to the family of your father, but you belong to the family of your mother, right? So you inherit from the brother of your mother, not from your father, right? So it's a different system, right? Now, because of the slaving system, right, many men were married with enslaved women and had children, right?
Yeah.
But by definition, the women did not belong to any family because they were enslaved, right? And the core definition of being enslaved is that you lose your kingship, right? You are alone in this world, right? You have severed all the links with your kingship. You don't have protection. And the proverb, right, which is connected with the history of the Asafo company, right? I can't tell this one in particular, right? But I know that those who belong to that company would know that story and could tell me, you know, probably it comes from Anomabu or that you might see, especially for chiefs, right? For the people in the north, right? The stool for the people in the south, right? So the man clothes, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. So I told you about the fact that the 18th century, 19th century was gold powder, right? So here you have a certain number of artifacts that are illustrating this stuff. So you have the spoons, right? This is to actually separate the gold powder from the small nuggets or things like that, right? Small nuggets in Ashanti would go to the king. You cannot use them. You can only use powder, gold powder. Yes, everything that is nugget has to go to the king. These are illustrating gold weights, so things that were used to actually weight the amount of gold. And they start like this, you know, very symbolic and having probably a meaning in terms of the quantity of things, but this has been totally forgotten, like the system of counting and the system of measuring weight. And then gradually they evolve into these objects that, you know, are even today, you know, things that you can find in the tourist industry, you know, all these figurines and so on, all right? If you see there, you see the vessel, usually a brass vessel, right? So the lineage, right, is kind of as of this spot with gold powder, spoons, weight, right, and scale, right? And this was used to, you know, to do the transactions in gold. And as you can see, all these things are made either of silver or of copper, right? And so you imagine that these things were actually cut from imported basins, right? And then reworked, right, into these spoons, right?
What a work, yeah.
Yeah, very nice repoussé work, yeah. All right. Some people could be afraid of a diseased person, right, which was disposed on his burial, right, as a kind of a place where people are going to offer offerings, pay, pour libation, and so on, like a marker of course, in recent times, this has totally disappeared. People are buried in cemeteries, kind of Christian, during the colonial era, there's been quite a number of legal obligations, right, that force people to actually bury in cemeteries for sanitation purposes, all right. But traditionally, people were buried in many, many different ways, all right, depending on their place in society, depending on their, the status and so on. Many were buried inside the house. Some could be buried in special cemeteries, in sacred groves. Some could be buried, thrown away in the bush, all right. So depending on how you die and who you are in the society, you could go through very different ways of getting buried. So this was for significant individual in the society, all right.